huge implications if China is able to, say, develop a naval base in the Solomon Islands. That will threaten Australia's national security like nothing else since World War II. Australia has a lot more in common, I think, with countries like Singapore, Malaysia, than most Australians think.
If you had like a magic wand, what's an issue that you would fix? All right. Well, welcome to Talk Radic, episode number 9. And we're very pleased to have our friend and our guest, Peter Stoodley, today with us.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Ben and Raf.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I'll just introduce you first so our listeners know who you are and a bit about you. Peter Stoodley is a 5th-year law and arts student at UNSW Sydney with a strong interest in Australian public policy. From state and domestic issues to Australia's relationships with its regional neighbours and major global powers. His perspective has been shaped by a range of formative international and community experiences, including volunteer work in camps in Vanuatu and Australia's Northern Territory, an academic exchange in Japan, and participation in the UNIV conference in Rome.
Welcome to the show. But I think, from that description and from what I know about you, you've clearly got a keen interest in public policy, in politics, domestic, and how Australia fits in that internationally. What really sparked that for you?
Yeah, so Raf, basically back in school, I had some great teachers in kind of like the history fields, the HISI fields. So economics, that was like a great subject. I had some good teachers for that. And then in English as well. And so I think I had a bit of a tendency to like the humanities.
Yeah.
That just meant that, I had these discussions with people in class, when I read some stuff about things, whether it be like, world history, whether it be Australian elections every now and then when they came up, I'd probably be like, oh, what was going on here? And watch a little bit online about that. But then also just like having chats with my mates or relatives every now and then, you kind of go like, why is this the way it is? Are we really going to accept the status quo on this? So that's why. And then there were a couple of like major events that were going on in Australia at the time. And that made me think like, oh, it'd be really cool to be like one of the people in the room kind of making some decisions about this. And so I decided, let's study politics, and you can kind of choose a degree here, all the different ones at the different universities in those booklets. And then, after that, I also thought, oh, could be good, if you never try, you never know. I'll do some law maybe if I get in. And then, I've decided to keep both. So, yeah.
And do you think like the law complements the politics, and what have you taken from doing those 2 degrees together?
Yeah, I mean, in my first year, I really liked law because you're with people who have, generally speaking, a good grasp of like both sides of an issue. So to be a good lawyer, you need to think, okay, what are my client's interests? And also, what is the other side's interests?
Yeah.
Because, a dispute, there are 2 sides to a dispute. And if you want to provide good advice, you have to have an awareness of both. You can't kind of just like run headlong. Whereas I found in politics, sometimes you have people who are super like, and it's good, they're very ardent, whatever. But, that was kind of got heated. And you
more
had
opinionated.
Yeah, you had very opinionated people. So maybe after like 2 hours of debating something in an arts course, it was nice to come back to law and kind of like, read what, previous decisions and understand the logic there. So I think it's been good to have a bit of both.
Yeah. And so in that brief description that Ben just read about you, he mentioned that you traveled a lot. How do you think those traveling experiences shaped how you view public policy?
Yeah, so when I was mowing lawns, trying to get some cash or like doing some gardens for some old people in my area to go overseas and go on exchange, I was thinking like, oh yeah, this is just going to be great, like 4 weeks in another country. It's worth a bit of the effort now. But it wasn't just a good experience then. It's actually like I think definitely been very formative for me. Um, you're meeting people. In places like Japan where they have like some serious issues with their, I guess, like demographic issues.
Oh yeah.
You can just see in the street there's like an absence of kids,
Yeah.
and it's very noticeable.
Yeah.
And then you hear about like the trillions of dollars of debt that they're in,
Yeah.
and you go like, who's going to pay that off? And then that makes sense, like why there's a dependency on technology. So that was really interesting for me to go there and be like, okay, there are like amazing parts to this other country, stuff that we can bring, and that's what an exchange is about. Like, what can we bring back and what can we give them?
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, this is actually kind of interesting. And then there's also like there were all sorts of kind of regional things going on at the time. Back when I was in middle high school, when I was going on these things, there was like a big deal with North Korea,
Oh,
and
yeah.
like how the US
I
was
remember, yeah.
was like involved with US. There were a strong US military presence in Japan as well. What do the locals actually think about that? So it was just a really cool time to be overseas as well. And then Raf mentioned, some of the other trips I've done. Vanuatu is you can just see it like walking down the streets. We were there in an outer island, so a lot of Australian tourists go to like the main island where a lot of the cruise ships dock. But our one was a bit kind of more remote. They had some resorts there, but what our work camp was doing was kind of helping to fix up a school and a local church on this island in Santo, and you can just see that there's kind of a competition going on between Australia and China about aid projects. So there was this abandoned bus at the school, like windows smashed, just kind of like long grass growing around it, which had like China aid like written on the side of it.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at that and being like, what a waste of money. Like, this is not a very old bus. It's not even rusting away. But for whatever reason, they can't maintain it, or they can't find people to use it or to drive it. And it's just kind of laying waste here. And then you go down to the town, there are cops wearing New South Wales police uniform, and you go, okay, that seems to be a little bit more useful. And there were like some really big infrastructure projects that the Chinese government was funding there. Debatable usefulness for a small island. And then Australia, I did a bit of research coming back, and I was like, what does Australia do there? And it's definitely much more kind of that kind of soft diplomacy where it's like, oh, we'll fund some scholarships, or we'll do some childhood immunization programs. So that's like a huge issue, because you've got like our neighbours who, some of them, they use the Australian dollar, who are maybe shifting their glance to like another country, who's providing them with some enticing things, including presidential perks, things like that. So I think it's just like a super interesting time that we're living in globally.
Yeah. And you mentioned like there's this competition between like Western nations, the US, the UK, Australia even. And then there's like China, which is emerging as like this global superpower. It's always been strong, but now it's covering more sectors, and you also like you talked a bit about like the aging population and stuff, and we're seeing that more in Western countries now as well, with the changing culture. Um, with all that in mind, like how do you see the global political, like what are some observations of yours about global politics nowadays?
So what people talk about at university is this idea of like there was kind of a dominant world power. After World War II, there was a period of Pax America, kind of a spoof of like Pax Romana, Pax Britannica at some stage as well. And they were saying like, oh, there's declining influence there. And we're gonna be in a multipolar world. That's I think the term that they use.
Yeah.
And look, okay, that's great. You can kind of find technical names and things like that. And you can also debate, like, is America actually a good global influence? I mean, just looking at it, you have like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You can actually say, like, is that actually genuinely a force for good around the world? Going and telling people in poorer nations how they should live their lives. Compare that to a really great American initiative in another country, which is actually doing a lot of good. We know that there've also been some important developments in Australia's relationship with the United States, joint operations and things like that, which have been in, I guess, our national interests, and also in the interests of some other countries as well. And then you have those other wars where it's kind of a lot more kind of unclear as to whether they were moral at all. So I think it's really cool to look at those that kind of history. I don't think you can explain America now without having an understanding, like, kind of way back.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate about people who go to America. I've never been. They've gone there and they've told me, like, I understand gun problems because I understand the Constitution and the American Civil War and all of those sorts of issues, and like the culture, because like Australia is just like a world away. So I think with all of these issues, you need to understand what was going on perhaps generations before. If you look at China, and you look at like people of our age and a bit older as well, who grew up in the one child policy in China, that's a huge issue that they're only just realizing the magnitude of, because you have a country which has a preference for male offspring.
They got too many boys.
Having too many boys, and so it's like, well, it's not just like how are they going to sustain their aging population? It's just going to be like,
how are these
people going to have kids now? How we know that the family is important for people's emotional needs as well.
Huge social issue.
Yeah,
not just economic.
For sure. And Japan as well has that's kind of been more probably widely discussed for longer. But the same thing is happening in Western countries as well. And we can prop it up in Western countries because obviously we have high migration. And so when there's a populist argument that you just like stop immigration, it's like we do need a level of immigration, like just to remain as a prosperous society.
Do you think we'd be like Japan if we didn't?
I think the thing about Japan again is the like homogeneity. Like they have a culture that they've been able to preserve from globalization. They had that kind of the Tokugawa shogunate and those sorts of things that you learn about in history. Again, unless you understand the history, you can't understand the present. And it's like, okay, well, they've preserved all these amazing traditions, the language, the dress, the respect for authority, and they have obviously there's a lot of beauty to that. But people who live there say, like, no matter how long you live there, you'll never be Japanese. Even if you can speak the language and you work there and you naturalize a family.
There is like this ingrained culture in Japan where it's almost like it's ethno-nationalism, really. Like it's they don't call it ethno-nationalism obviously because it has very bad connotations, but there is a sense in Japan where if you're a migrant, there's you're just not the same. And even that even applies to like Chinese and Korean migrants. There's this sense of superiority for a lot of Japanese people, that they are in some way different or better, and so they feel like they need to protect their culture. Right? They have this protectionist culture, and I see Japan as, I don't know if you agree with this, but I see Japan as having a lot of the same issues that we might have in the future. Right, the same demographic problems, a lot of the same financial problems. And with the rise of populist parties in most of the West, I can foresee a future where there will be countries, perhaps not Australia, because we're already so multicultural, but places like Italy, which have seen a rise in populist anti-immigration sentiment, have that same problem as Japan does now have now. But I wanted to ask you a question about what you said at the beginning of what we were talking about this idea of the multipolar world, right? Because I think there is a sense, especially particularly after everything that Trump's been doing, that the American hegemony, right, that they have had over global economics and politics is starting to fracture. And there was a really great speech by Prime Minister Carney, who's the head of the Canada, not the Canada, head of Canada. And he's basically said, look, these us middle powers, so like the members of the EU and Canada, and I think I would put Australia in that category as well, need to learn to stand on their own and play both sides of this new power balance between the US and China. And I want to get your thoughts on how you think Australia might sit in this new global order, right?
Yeah, so Australia is still the largest provider of aid to Pacific countries. China hasn't caught up yet.
Yeah.
And there have been programs like the Pacific Step Up and things like that. There's all sorts of names that different countries have to investing in the Pacific. And I think that this is a part of the world where there's huge, huge implications if China is able to, say, develop a naval base in the Solomon Islands.
Yeah.
That will threaten Australia's national security like nothing else since World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So just like how Australia's sovereignty was secured in a way by pushing back the Japanese on the Kokoda Trail, I think people are going to be watching what's happening with the development of naval bases in Southeast Asia and potentially in the Pacific with a high degree of concern.
Mm-hmm.
There is a great book that I'm plugging here. It's called The Echidna Strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with everything that it says, but one thing it does say is like Australia could be an echidna, which is basically a creature that is not easy to prey on because it's got kind of spikes.
Yeah.
And so when there is an issue, it can kind of just retreat and like show, like
I like that.
If you've seen them in the wild, they're kind of a bit weird. They kind of dig into the ground and just have these spikes. And so it's like, it's really not worth like picking a fight with it. We'll just leave it alone.
Yeah.
And echidna doesn't go out. Basically one of the arguments is it doesn't go out in a submarine and start like attacking other countries.
Right.
And so it's attacking AUKUS because it's saying like, why should we be involved in conflicts out in, whether it be in the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, or whatever, when we could just focus on our own little part of the world and just be
like corner off that section of the world, right?
Yeah.
That's our sphere of influence, sort of thing.
Yeah, being like, if another country wanted our natural resources, okay, it's not worth invading us to get those. Just continue trading us like we had before. That's the idea of the book. I guess it's kind of a little bit like the Israeli idea of just kind of having a really good air defense system. So this book would be saying like we need to invest in air defenses because we have this amazing geographical defense as being this island in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that the book was saying, which I want to touch on, is this idea of like we need to be close to Indonesia because they're a country like many times the size of us in terms of population, and they're really concerned about like their neighbours. Do they have good intentions with their defence procurements and things like that. So I think we definitely need to put even more money. And there's a Senator Jess Collins who talks about she talked about it in a maiden speech about the blue continent, which is the Pacific. So like a huge space with these small islands, but like obviously very important. So I think we need to invest a lot in those aid programs. I think people have even flirted in the past, and I think I wrote something at uni about this, about like not an equivalent of the European Union, but a feeling of like that, like the terms always thrown out there, like Pacific family and stuff like that. And I'm like,
Right.
it's so condescending because it's like, you know, when people say that, they're still saying like Australia is like the parent, and
Yeah.
it's like these countries might not want us to go in and lecture them about how they need to run themselves. So instead of being super patronizing, I think we definitely need to hear from them about what are their issues on the ground.
Yeah.
So sending back people to the Pacific, whether it be through like a Colombo scheme, so we have Australians going and studying in the Pacific, and Pacific people coming and studying in Australia, akin to the Colombo Plan, which is essentially a way of building relationships with Asian countries when communism was kind of spreading throughout Asia, was to, okay, instead of us, you know, just treating this as like something that needs a military solution, it's like, no, like we'll invite people from those areas, like Colombo or wherever, to from Sri Lanka to Australia, and then vice versa.
Yeah.
And there's actually like that next generation is familiar with these places,
Yeah.
and then you can have trade, and then you can have kind of like better relationships.
Soft power.
Yeah,
Soft
yeah,
power rather than hard.
yeah. And I think they will. I think those countries will acknowledge that. Yeah, we do need some aid, but don't just throw it at us, expecting stuff from them. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, like, I understand like this, you know, this need to create a strategy where we, you know, align ourselves with the rest of the Pacific and really focus on like, you know, creating this unity and so we can't be like kicked around by the superpowers. Do you think that, you know, going forward, obviously you're not the prime minister, so you know, you don't have to have a clear answer on this, but going forward, do you think it's still prudent of us to continue following the US lead, right? Because in the past, our, you know, our global political policy has been, you know, follow the mainstream Western line, which was spearheaded by the United States. But I've heard some people say, look, yes, the US is still very important, and it is still, you know, the biggest economy in the world. But China is, by some metrics, you know, more powerful, bigger economy, and is closer, right? And some people argue, should we be cozying up to China more, right? And seeing them as a strategic ally rather than the United States.
Yeah, I think that there's a big difference between cozying up and like genuine, like good diplomacy.
Yeah.
I think it was quite disgraceful to see Daniel Andrews go to the event that he did in a few years months ago. That is outrageous. That's one side of the spectrum. Another side of it, yeah, because like Kim Jong Un was there.
Yeah, it was such a random photo. It was like Putin, Kim Jong Un, Xi Jinping, and then Andrews.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, like he's finally found his, you know, people of the same heart as him. No, but in all seriousness, I think that we need to have a mature relationship with China.
Yeah.
I think we need to realize just how many like hardworking Chinese people are in Australia who love Australia, who have Australian values, but don't want us to neglect that relationship. So that's one thing. The diaspora, you know, we can't forget how important the Chinese people are to us now. And then also, like, you know, we obviously provide them with a lot of goods, minerals, etc., and they provide us with a lot of goods as well. So when there are issues that are political, there tends to be implications for Australian farmers. For example, there was a issue a few years ago where there were restrictions placed on Australian wines and seafood and stuff like that. Really small things, but for those growers or producers, like they were like, "What's going on? Like, is this really good? Is this really good? Like foreign affairs, diplomacy? If we're the ones like bearing the cost of what the government wants to prosecute." So yeah, we need to be really careful of that. We need to be mature. But yeah, I just think more dialogue than rather than less. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know there was a sort of strategy to encircle China like years ago. between like the US and
Yeah.
like Australia. They wanted to like create basically like a western border around China and cut off a lot of China suppliers. And I think Trump in his first term pulled out of that, which meant, free trade went to China, and now, that snowball has gotten so big you can't encircle it, you can't isolate it. You have to engage with it. You have to actually like touch it. It's not like North Korea, right? We can
Yeah.
ignore North Korea all we want. We can isolate it, and they'll let them be. But China is so influential now. You can't
Yeah.
you can't not deal with them,
Yeah.
right?
And also with like international affairs and stuff, I feel like you can't neglect the social and cultural aspect. But maybe can I get your thoughts on that? Like, because obviously, I mean, most people think about it with like trade and economic agreements and stuff. But how important do you think like aligning with countries socially and culturally is? And it's interesting as well because we almost like blindly follow the US and assume that the Australian culture is like, oh, we're the same, or we're
Yeah.
like, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to understand Australian culture, you need to understand, yeah, like that we have our own identity now, but we do have elements that we've borrowed from other countries as well. So I think you need to understand to some extent, if you're looking at the Australian uh, judicial system, you need to understand the common law traditions. You need to understand the British system. In terms of the current culture, I think the US, like idea of kind of the that capitalist system has been in around in Australia for a while. I don't think that it's worth getting into too much critique about that. That's kind of become a very international thing. A lot of people talk about that. They kind of critique like the American capitalist system being like transplanted around the world, or like like those cartoons of like Coke cans being like thrown from warships onto different
Yeah.
countries. Yeah, I think it's important to chart our own course, remaining close with the US, because there are so many things in terms of values that we do broadly share with them. But we can't neglect all of the other countries that are important for our own security and economic development, even if the culture is, yeah, like a little bit different because they're not in the kind of the Anglosphere. I think this is a good point to mention that Australia has a lot more in common, I think, with countries like Singapore, Malaysia than most Australians think. Again, they're kind of
Oh yeah.
they're states with that kind of Commonwealth history. So and I believe that both of them are current common law systems as well. So there are like like you guys would know this as lawyers. There are some key cases that are important in Australia to this day, but are also in Singapore and in all of these other countries that have that common law heritage. So I think that's another thing that we can kind of look at is like, okay, these countries um, which seem to be a bit distinct. Maybe it's because of their location, or maybe it's because of their like it's more to do with the region. But like this, so they have like very they have very similar problems to us. For example, Singapore and Malaysia are caught in the kind of the crosshairs of the kind of US China tension as well.
Yeah.
So how about a bit more dialogue with them as well,
Yeah.
rather than just exclusively on the people that we're comfortable talking to, like New Zealand or Canada or people like that.
Yeah.
I think Japan. I think the current Prime Minister of Japan is a great example of someone who is like in wanting to engage in diplomacy, and I think we should kind of definitely dialogue with her about how we can kind of work together and that kind of thing. Yeah.
And you're touching a bit on like identity, national identity. Um, you can take this question wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
What do you think it means to be an Australian citizen?
Yeah, that's a tough question because there's so many layers. I like this idea that the person who came up with this idea is Noel Pearson. Now, Noel Pearson has been quoted by people who are perhaps more conservative, as well as people who are perhaps a bit more progressive in Australian public life. He's an Aboriginal man who speaks a lot on kind of political issues and then also education issues. And he's done a lot of work about how we can kind of improve educational outcomes in Indigenous communities. Anyway, but he said that Australia has uh, uh, an ancient Indigenous aspect to it.
Mhm.
They have British laws and kind of a British system, and then they also have like a migrant character.
Yeah. That
And
idea, sorry, that idea has been used a lot by Tony Abbott as well.
yeah, Tony
Which is
Abbott,
cool.
I think, does have respect for Noel Pearson, so that's
Yeah.
probably why he's used it as well. But I believe that Noel Pearson was the original kind
original,
of
yeah.
person who was able to come up with the succinct phrase, and that's not the exact quote. There is obviously a far better
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could read
But yeah, the three pillars of
yeah, of
Australia.
Australian culture. So I think, he's probably more wise than me to kind of give an assessment on that. What I would say is that I grew up in a part of Australia where everyone comes from everywhere, but I didn't really experience, at least growing up in school, people kind of having a disgust for like Australian culture. I think that definitely came at universities.
Mm.
And I think I think a lot of the culture war has been waged online as well, which is kind of weird because are we amplifying issues on social media that aren't actually a big deal there? Or are we solving the issues? That's a big thing because sometimes people say, oh, if I post this or if I make a deal about this particular racist event, then it will, um, people might change. But then at the same time, perhaps that um, paints like a really negative picture of the country as a whole.
Mhm.
Where you see like places in regional Australia where there are people from all over the world, like who consider themselves to be like Australians, and they've just brought aspects of their culture that they want to still continue.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
do you think the media has like radicalized university students, the youth, sort of like because it's so polarized and it's only showing, the posts that show like hate and anger and these strong emotion,
Yeah.
they are usually the ones that perform well. So do you think that's an issue?
Yeah, like I think, for example, I was speaking to this about actually from a teacher the other day, and he was saying that like kids are consuming a lot of content now, which is like denying the Holocaust and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
And that's just ridiculous. Like, because instead of engaging in, I think I understand where this recent kind of whole rise in anti-Semitism comes from. It comes from existing prejudices being kind of and feelings being able to be like validated by people on the right and the left. Sorry, what you'd say, right?
Well, I was gonna say, like, I think it actually stems a lot from real, like, anti-Israeli government sentiment, right? Like, if you are not a fan of what the Israeli government's doing in right now, and then you get onto social media, and then you go down this sort of path, right? It gets you down this pipeline, and eventually you go from I don't really like what Benjamin and Netanyahu's how he's handling the situation in Gaza. Then that goes into, I don't like how the Israel is what they're doing right now,
Yeah.
and then that goes down to the further broader idea of Holocaust denial. I think.
Yeah.
And it's easier to not only is it easier, but you also get more views
Yeah.
if you simply just say something ridiculous like that,
Yeah.
rather than actually critiquing like the politics,
Yeah.
the principles, the policy.
Yeah.
But I think you said that you think the media is amplifying this sort of division.
Media and social media.
Yeah,
as well.
social media all
for
together,
sure,
right? They're all the
Yeah.
same thing, really. I just want to. I don't know. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I also think that the media. I don't know the way that the relationship works, right? But I think the media is actually what gets popular is informed by the people, right? What people consume. So I don't know if it's the people are getting more divided, and then they're consuming more, divisive media, and then that makes that divisive media more popular, which then in turn, like apostolizes that sort of divisive rhetoric to more people, and then that gets more popular, and it's like a flywheel, right? Now I don't know where that starts. Is it the media that started getting more divisive, or is it the people that started consuming more divisive media? And I want to get your thoughts on where you think that comes from.
Yeah, I think that people want to know about what's happening in the world,
Yeah.
but they don't have much time as well. So in the past, you would read an article or watch a clip that had been kind of edited and everything like that, and then you would form your opinion.
Yeah.
And usually it was quite reflective of where like that source. And so if you watch the news from one channel and then another, you could weigh them up and be like, oh, what do I actually feel about this issue? But now it's kind of like your feed and the algorithm. And I used to think like the whole thing about the algorithm was kind of overstated, but the more I'm realizing like, yeah, the algorithm is definitely a thing. If you like or engage with content from one particular perspective, it's more likely that you're going to be given other things like that. And so I think that idea of like an echo chamber is a really big issue. With you kind of circling back to let's just take the whole Israeli conflict as a case study, because I think this was really interesting going to university for at least and studying an arts degree, I think for 2 and a bit years whilst that was ongoing since October 2023. I remember the day, I think it was October 8th, maybe in Australia by that time. I was in this lecture, and there weren't that many people there for some reason that day. It was a foreign policy lecture, and the convener was talking about what had just eventuated in Israel, and like these people like immediately launched into like, but this is just like resistance, and like it's justified, and I was like, what? Like I was like shocked because I mean I never really like looked into the matter before.
Yeah.
But I was like all I could see is like just the slaughter of innocent people, like and the rape of all sorts of poor people, trapped in those like particular localities in the south of Israel. And I was shocked that people could be so radicalized to justify that straight away, or immediately blame uh, the plight of those people on the fact.
Victims.
Yeah. And it was just like whoa, like this is like a huge issue anyway. And that continued because it was kind of like, oh, like from the people who are kind of more pro Hamas, like not pro Palestine per se.
Yeah.
It was more kind of like like resistance,
Anti-Israel.
like, yeah, like anti-Jewish. They were kind of able to they wanted to justify the Hamas attacks as like the natural consequences of the occupations or whatever. But it was like, why can't we criticize the actions of the Israeli government, condemn those, and then also condemn an attack, or condemn and try to break down these arguments about kind of what Hamas is doing as well. There was never a nuance in debates as well. If you read articles in a particular, like newspaper or coming from a particular media group, it was always kind of like, remember what the Palestinians did, therefore Israel, go ahead, clean the place up. And it was like, no, like, these are innocent people who are, again, caught in the crossfire. I remember reading like the comments of a post about the church being blown up, and people being like, oh, it was obviously a mistake, and like the Israelis, this would never have happened if Hamas surrendered. And it's like, bro, these people are not like Palestinian extremists. They're Palestinian Christians. They definitely don't belong to, like this kind of group. And they're dying or suffering as a result of the actions of another government.
Yeah.
And so that's when in class, actually before the whole Iran thing, I raised the idea of just war. And the teacher actually really liked it because he was like, oh yeah, like this gave him an opportunity to explain to class the idea of just war theory. And I think if you never, like, if you're one of those people who's like so proud that, you know, like my opinion is like so important, I'm never going to change it. I'm just going to like, you know, like defend it to the hill. Then it's like, well, you know, like, you know, generations of thinkers have come before you. If you never tap into their arguments or learn from them about like oratory or like debating, or if you're too proud to like concede points, then you actually look quite like stupid.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it is good to like kind of read widely, consume different sources of media, and then also, yeah, like have debates with people who don't necessarily think the same thing, because then you can change your opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that was what was lost a lot in that whole debate, which is still ongoing in a way, was engaging with
I do wonder if that is the fact that that shift away from mainstream media being the primary source of information to social media has caused some of this shift into certainty, right? You mentioned like in that lecture, everyone immediately picked a side, right? They had a side and they were like zealous advocates for that side. I wonder if social media, the way that the algorithm's set up, right, because it promotes, right, and it pushes the same stuff that you already like, right? You
Yeah.
create that echo chamber sort of thing. We get siloed into our different groups, and then because everyone's reinforcing you, you start to believe yourself, all my ideas are great.
Yeah.
Right? And then you strip away all that nuance.
Yeah.
And then when you get to a point where you have to make a judgment call on something, you don't have the ability to say, I don't know. Or,
Yeah.
I need to see more information. It's pick a side. If you're not with me, you're against me.
Yeah.
And then you lose all that nuance.
For sure.
So I don't know how anyone would possibly fix that. I mean, the cat's out of the bag. Social media is the dominant source of information now.
Yeah.
Especially for young people, but even that demographics getting older and older as social media becomes more mature.
Yeah.
And it's not like the media, like the tech companies are going to change anything.
Yeah.
It boosts their engagement, makes their numbers look good. So I don't have a solution for that. And
I do see that a lot, like at uni and just in like the youth nowadays, like this lack of intellectual humility. You know? And it's so much easier to sort of just have this opinion because we feel like because you know, back in the old days, you wouldn't have the exposure to all this different media. So we almost feel like we know more, but then that has made us a bit more stubborn and less intellectually humble.
Yeah.
But maybe you could give us like what's something, a belief or an assumption that you had that was challenged and then you've changed it.
Yeah, so I used to believe in a very like top-down approach to things like welfare or to dealing with like serious issues of poverty. So like more of a heavy-handed approach from the government.
Yeah.
So, for example, if one particular group or jurisdiction is not doing something well, then a higher government or authority should come in and like fix things up because if they can't do their job, do that. But then this goes back to one of these trips I did. In the Northern Territory, we were staying in this town called Catherine, which is a bit of a meeting point for that kind of region, about 3 hours south of Darwin, and there was a lot of disadvantage there.
Yeah.
But one night we were invited to one of these gatherings from the community that we were kind of trying to assist in kind of in their town, and it was called the Men's Night, and it was basically these young kind of adolescents and their uncles and their fathers, other members of their community, had spent the time teaching them certain skills and certain cultural things, and then these guys weren't just relatives, but they often were employed as part of the association of that particular group, or in the national parks and things like that. So they were definitely qualified, and it was personalized. and then you could just see in those like young guys that they was like so proud of what they'd achieved, and they did kind of these displays for us, like the dances and the music, and then they also had like a presentation that we watched, and it was really good. And all of us were like so happy that we were able to witness that, because they're quite secretive as well. And afterwards, just talking to them, I realized like instead of like Canberra or like the local government being the one to try and change, because and one of these ladies was talking to me about like the difficulties with say like lack of purpose in those communities. Like it's not for us to tell them how to live, or to to try and deal with everything and throw money at this, or like continue to change the laws. I think it's really about people like immersing themselves with other people, understanding the different problems that they face, and then a personalized response to that. So I was really happy to say that I changed my view on those sorts of issues after that experience. I thought, okay, what we need to do is we need to send like support for these good organizations, and we need to kind of like tell people about like how good these groups are, and then perhaps we can assist them. But like, yeah, get back to the family. Like the family and the community are often the most important places for a society to flourish. And so that kind of was a good lesson for me. Yeah.
I reckon, yeah, I think that's a very wise lesson to learn, because, I mean, you look back at history, because we can always learn from history, right? When central government gets too big, obviously you need central government, right? There are things that you need that high level view of the entire economy and the entire scope of the society to understand and to plan out. But when central government gets so bogged down in legislating the nitty gritty of the daily runnings, it just doesn't work, because it's not really their fault, because they're in the other side of the country, right? And they don't know.
Yeah, it's this idea called subsidiarity,
Yeah.
which is like we shouldn't needlessly overrule the authority or existing power structure or institution.
Yeah.
It's like oh me, the government, I'm going to teach your kids what they should believe or what they should and shouldn't know.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, like
Because they're going to resist
that's
that.
outside of your scope.
Yeah.
It should be for what's the closest to authority to your kids. Okay, it's the family. It's their parents. They should be dealing with that. And then kind of the role of the school and the state is to assist people in upbringing their kids. And I used to think of these ideas as kind of like super kind of whack and kind of like new age, but they're actually really good. And I think it explains a lot of issues that we have in countries where, for example, countries that underwent major revolution in the last century. Where are they super influential? It's kind of in the youth.
Yeah.
Pitting parents against their kids and vice versa. Trying to re-educate people. I mean, it's still happening, re-education today. Banning religious expression, or banning books, because like it's too dangerous for young people to read widely. So I think that's something that we need to be really careful about. It's like, okay, how do we protect these kind of institutions?
Because I think that can be leveled at many different aspects of governance, right?
Yeah.
Because I like to look at Chinese history in the 20th century and how they achieved that economic turnaround, right? And it wasn't because they came up with a better plan to dictate. Because when they tried to dictate a plan of economic policy, you get the Great Leap Forward and 10 million people die, right?
Yeah.
It was only after they played into the existing incentive structure that had existed for like centuries. This idea that you produce labor and you get monetary compensation return. When they embrace that, when they embrace the grassroots like foundation that the country is built upon, when they literally stop doing so much, then you get the economic turnaround under in the 80s and 90s under Deng Xiaoping, right? But then it can also be economic, but it can also be like social, right, or cultural, right? Because no cultural movement has ever come top down.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
all the, every piece of influential culture always comes from, the people, and it's never been dictated by
Yeah.
on high, right?
Yeah.
Because, look at the most popular music of today in Western culture, it finds its roots in like jazz music, right? You have jazz turning into rock and roll, which now turns into modern pop and hip hop and all that, and that's all because the government's not dictating that sort of stuff, right? As soon as the government gets involved, it becomes like uncool, it's uncouth, right? And it's like you almost want to be separate from that, and you want to go back to
Yeah.
your own small community. So I
Yeah.
think
I don't want to get too political, but I noticed the other day that some government minister said that like the sooner that kids are in childcare, the better for
Oh,
them. And I
we
was
talked a
like,
bit about
and I was
that.
like, that's outrageous. Like, did we talk about that? I can't
Yeah,
remember. Um,
that's crazy.
it was like instead of like let's find ways of having families be families.
just standardized.
And and assisting, and it's really hard. And I remember my mom was like this, like need to get back to work. Instead of assisting them or like finding solutions as a society, not just government, everyone has a role to play
Yeah.
here. Of how do we, afford them as much time with their newborn as possible, or as kids as possible, or even their dad. How can they get more involved and things like that. It's like no, like let's put them off to the institutions sooner. But people have said, psychologists have told us there are significant impacts if a kid for most of the week is in childcare, like a before school age. And it's like unbelievable that like people are being treated as just kind of like like baby factories, or that like the family is just like some kind of structure whereby like little uh like economic entities like,
Yeah, it's
are
almost
kind of
like
farmed and then able
yeah,
to go and be productive and like add value. It's like no, like you're a person first and foremost. And that's, I think, a really dangerous thing to do. And I'm really worried about the future generation if that's the attitude that we have to their development.
And I think what I gather from all this is that we need to better understand that, these different institutions, these different, like the family unit, they all have an important role and they all have like a specific role. Because, it's the government can't fix these like deeply ingrained social issues and stuff. And, like I have Argentinian family, and what we see in Argentina is like the government, instead of trying to fix like the cultural issues that bring all these economic issues and all these issues that they have, with unemployment, and they just throw money at people, and it's like that's just gonna make it worse,
Yeah.
and it's not fixing the issue. But I guess we'll move on. This is a really interesting question, I think. If you had like a magic wand, what's an issue that you would fix in Australian
Yeah.
politics or in global politics?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the local. So I'm really worried about. I should stop saying I'm worried about things. I'm in some ways hopeful. I'm in some ways hopeful about our generation. I definitely think that we're tapping into pre-existing kind of sources of knowledge, which I think is really, really good. I think that, and I found this at university, that people are like, oh, I want to read the classics. I was like, that's so good. And I was trying to read some classics as well, with some difficulty. But I was like, okay, I'm really happy about that. So I think I'd kind of try and reform education. I think that it's less about producing and more about understanding and critical thinking, and also engaging with like a whole range of different material. So, if the curriculum is not working and the Australian curriculum is not working, our standards are going down, then maybe instead of like teaching kids how to analyze text, we should teach them how to appreciate text. Sorry, this sounds very airy fairy, but this is genuinely something I think should
If you
happen.
don't like the text, like, what are you going to say about it?
Yeah. Like one of my mates from uni was like last time I read a book was like 1984, which I was forced to do in year 12.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's so sad because there are so many good books.
Yeah.
Um,
That is a great book.
yeah.
It's fine.
No, it's okay. It's okay. there's like so many other good ones that aren't that you don't read for the purpose of like this tells me about this, or like when you're reading it, you're not thinking about like was there an intention in like kind of the syntax of this sentence, like was there something that the author meant by this. It's like no, I just genuinely like this book is really good, and it helps me understand myself, the human condition, but it's just via like a really good read. Well, this challenges me, and like I'm up for it because it's going to be uncomfortable, but like it's still a good book to read. So I think that's one thing I would try and form education. I think from my experience at school, we were taught like how to use tech, but like it almost became like tech is going to solve our problems, and like we need to rely on it. But I think it's just a tool at the end of the day, and I think we need to get better at like seeing it as a tool rather than a master. That's another thing that someone told me at uni was like your phone's a great tool, but like a terrible master. So I think ways of getting people, like particularly kids, like outside experimenting, falling out of trees, reading, like talking to each other, and I think a big thing is like kind of how we look after them. So yeah, that's one thing.
I think that's a really good idea, actually. I always often think about how, like, as you know, we all three of us liked English in high school, but I knew plenty of guys who hated English, right? And I think that's for
Fair enough.
fair
Yeah.
enough, good enough reasons, right?
Yeah.
Because the original idea of learning English in the way that we do is so you get an appreciation of the text, and you learn to love reading, you learn to love learning,
Yeah.
and then you learn to think and think critically about and analyze things.
Not memorizing essays.
Yes, but the thing is the way that our current system is set up is it is literally set up so that it's like a game. You're trying to win, right? And I don't think there's not like a winning in learning.
Yeah.
There's no scoreboard, or there shouldn't be a scoreboard. But the way that school is set up is, you got to win, and because there's like a winner and a loser in our education system currently. People basically try to abuse the rules, and then that's where you get this hyper strict standardized. You need to analyze 3 quotes per paragraph.
Yeah, depressed students.
Yeah, and then it's just you suck all the joy out of it because it's like
take this example, let's apply critical theory to Shakespeare. Like, give me a break. Or like let's look at like iambic pentameter. Look, okay, very important that you understand the structure, but Shakespeare was not designed to be read in a 21st century classroom, and you have the translation there, and you're like
highlighting the passages.
It's meant to be observed. It's meant to be like
it's meant to be a joy.
Play.
Yeah.
We forget that, right?
So like bring a bit of life to it, please. If possible, like find a way to watch it.
Yeah.
But like maybe for some people you can't start with that. Like don't destroy it to like teach. Get people to fall in love with it, and then if not, like provide them with some other texts that are actually really good as well.
I think
plenty good out.
Biggest thing, at least definitely for English, I think is detangling it from the idea that it is simply a vehicle to get into university.
Yeah.
Because it's like it turns it into almost like you turn your education into the same way you think about your finances.
Yeah.
Where it's like I gotta grind and do these exact steps, and then I'll get it. And I would enjoy the steps. I would enjoy it, but it will it will grow me dividends. It's like an investment. But really, that just turns people off from learning outside of what they need. Like if you treat your job like it's just a job for money, and then you won the lottery and you have infinite money, you're not going back to the job.
Yeah.
Right. And if you treat education like a vehicle to get to university, right, or university as a vehicle to get to a job, once you're done with that, you never learn again.
Yeah.
And then that really has some very bad downstream effects. Right?
I'm not far enough into it yet, but I'm reading this book called The Idea of a University by John Henry Newman, and it's a really good book. Like I highly recommend it. From what I've read, I've only read a little bit of it, but it's basically a collection of lectures that he has given back in the 18th. I think it was about the middle of the 1800s. And one of the things that he talks is like university is not just to make scientific discoveries. It's about dissemination of information to young people or to the next generation or to people who are going to then to take that in and to use it for a purpose. So like that's why I hate when you see like amazing labs at universities, and I'm like, are people ever going to like learning these labs, or is it kind of just like a that is a scientific institution? Why can't you have that fund that? A university is a way of by his idea, by his logic, is far more complex, and that's why there has to be a broad range of faculties that are represented at a university. He was arguing in that book for like, because they were starting to omit like theology departments, and he's like, this has major implications. Anyway,
wow, if he was here nowadays, he'd be
like look at some of these universities. I mean, we go to a STEM university, and like that's great. It's done some amazing. Well, apparently there are some amazing like things that they've developed, or like some amazing scientific experiments that they've conducted. But is the student able to apply, to learn from the best, to gain a better understanding of the universe, to engage with universals, and I think ultimately like to meet the people around them that are going to play a major role in their life, like whether it be personally or in their career. So that's another thing on education, which I think is worth reading if you have a chance.
Newman. Yeah.
Did he also do the development of doctrine?
Yes.
Is that the same?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. That's what he's known for.
Yeah.
It shows you like scientists and mathematicians, they used to be like good at writing, and pretty like everyone used to be like multi.
There was this idea in the past where you're like an intellectual, and then you dip your toes in everything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Plato on the top of the academy said, I don't know the exact Greek, but it basically said if you don't like geometry, you can't come in, right? This idea that you shouldn't decouple the humanities from the maths and the sciences, right?
Yeah.
They should all work together in like this interdisciplinary thing, but our current system doesn't encourage that, right?
Yeah.
Like when I was in high school, I was not good at maths or science, right? I was good at English and I was good at history, and so I'm incentivized. I'm never incentivized to open my math textbook. In as soon as I can avoid it, right? I'm always incentivized to just work to my strengths so that I can maximize my A type.
But in Australia in the 2020s, the idea is like, if you don't like it, then don't do it. Or it's like
drop out.
Or it's like we should be focused on getting you a job, and it's like, can I have a few years to find out what I like doing? To learn. By the same token, for some people, they're going to be so much more happy if they learn with their hands, like apprenticeships. Like that's a huge thing. That's kind of a dying thing, but like people used to learn engineering via apprenticeship, all these other skills. So we don't need to go to an institution to get a job. Like there are so many pathways for young people to develop as a person, to find out what they're good at and to realize their talents. And some people that they don't need tertiary education. They walk into like amazing jobs, and they actually are more likely, particularly if you're in one of those trades, to earn more in the medium to long term than someone who goes to, like, say, university. So like I think we need to just tell young people, like, there's not something wrong with you if you're currently not enjoying this. We need to change how we teach things. We definitely need to like overhaul the education system. From schools, from we talk about how we've done the whole thing, we've done childcare but like all of those need to be closely looked at, because
and there's this common phrase I've heard, and I think the fact that I hear it all the time means that our education system is deeply like flawed. It's that someone can come up to me and say, I really enjoy learning about XYZ subject outside of school. Right, this idea that they like learning, they like the concept and understanding more about the world and all this, but they just disengage by the system, and then that leads them to be like, and then that actually leads them to be disincentivized to learn outside of the system, right? And to actually cultivate what we should be cultivating, which is a love of learning and that continual growth. So I think we're really hamstring or our students are really hamstrung
Yeah.
by our current system. So I think we get to the point where if you were to wave a magic wand, you
Yeah.
would try and fix those things, and I think that's a very important thing to fix. But yeah,
Not to get too deep into this, but I feel like there'll always be a bit of like in youth there'll be a bit of like tension with institutions and like authority,
Hmm.
which kind of, you know, because I feel like, as you were saying, you know, I like learning about this, but outside of school. So maybe we need to like give students more freedom to explore like their interests and,
Yeah.
you know.
or like consider their interests. I
Yeah.
think because you get to a point where you're forced to pick, and you're almost forced to like incentivize some subjects and incentivize some areas that you will learn about a lot, and then completely disregard everything else.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
But I still think like, yes, this ideal world round, and this is very important, but also that specialization has. I'm not gonna ignore the fact it has produced a lot of good, right?
Yeah.
The idea that we can now specialize has led to, you know, a lot of innovations and you know, the increasing speed of things. But I still think we've gone too far in that idea of specialization.
Well, if you look at specialization in the US,
Yeah.
that comes after most people. A lot of university students do a liberal arts degree. So again, like the year 12 is not the end of their kind of multidisciplinary education. They do actually do maybe an undergrad or a diploma in liberal arts as well. I mean, I didn't get the chance to do a liberal arts degree. I would not consider social sciences as the same as liberal arts. That really looks at like philosophy, potentially like languages, theology, potentially even some science-based subjects, but it is definitely like literature, histories, humanities. So I think for people like, you know, maybe the arts degrees and students going into arts degrees is not the problem. It's just how we teach them and what we include in them.
Yes.
You know, like the number of classes that I've sat through where people have just like, you know, like gone, and it's the same regurgitated things each time. It's kind of like, you know, like society is broken, and like, you know, let's apply a Marxist worldview. It's just like, you know, spare me. Like, I think it's so important that we've actually done the history before we apply it to economics.
Do you think critical theory is a problem?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that if you apply like a theory, like whether it be constructivist theory to things, or you know, or obsessing over, you know, different forms of theory, then you actually you become a master at literally critiquing things. And I think at university as well, even the lecturers who are telling us to provide or to engage with this stuff, they do actually want solutions in their work, in the work that students submit. And I don't think students are engaging enough with solutions. I think they're obsessed with you know, like
Deconstructing, criticizing.
Yeah, like really abstract ideas. And you know, there's a lot of theory, kind of like a lot of academic articles that they're citing, and I think perhaps to be a little bit more
Practical,
empirical, as well. Like, you know, I think that was something I tried to do in my courses. I don't know how successful that went, but yeah, that's definitely something that's worth doing. Or just like conventionally, like, okay, here's an issue. What are the different ways that we can approach it, rather than like pigeonholing yourself through one frame? Like, what's one view? How do we look at it from the different angles? And that's why I think for a lot of us, that's why we preferred law, is because it was kind of this idea that, like, okay, there may not be a right and wrong answer, but there's definitely like two parties to this. You know, what are the interests, what are the values of one side, and what are the interests and values of the other side? And is there a nexus? Is there a way that we can resolve this dispute, and both people are satisfied? So that's another thing.
Great. Well, it's been such an honor to have you, Peter. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having Ben.
We had a very interesting conversation.
Very interesting. We actually went full circle. At the very start, you mentioned why you wanted to do a law degree and how it helped you with your nuance and understanding both sides of the argument. And then we just finished off with you going, and that's why I really like the law degree, where you see the nuance and both sides of the argument. So
yeah, we didn't really get to speak a lot about the law degree, but I think I like that you highlight that point, because that's the big thing that we're missing is the nuance.
yeah,
So yeah, good on you. Thanks for
Thanks for
the
coming on.
answer. This
thanks
was
for
a
having the time.
great podcast.
Yeah, all right.
Loved it.